Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Obaid Ruff. I am editor here at CIGA, which is Center for Islam and Global Affairs. On behalf of Center for Islam and Global Affairs, welcome everyone to our 19th lecture in our Ramadan webinar series. I know there are thousands of webinars every day, and you chose this one, so thank you everyone for attending. We are based here in Istanbul, Turkey at Istanbul Zaim University. Today's presenter, we are lucky to have Dr. Fuad Mimouni, who is a leadership development expert and executive coach. And he's not just a coach by profession, but he's a coach with actual experience. There are many coaches out there who are coaches because they can't do anything else. Dr. Mimouni is not that guy. He has actual corporate experience, including at the Islamic Development Bank. He's a certified professional behavioral analyst and a certified executive coach. Dr. Mimouni has studied in Morocco, in the United Kingdom, and in the United States. He has several publications, and we anticipate a future publication, hopefully on this same topic, inshallah, about Rumi in the boardroom. With that, Dr. Mimouni, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is my pleasure to be with you in this series of lectures organized by CIGA. And together, we will go through a journey with the poet and saint Jalaluddin Rumi to reflect on some of his poems and parables and see how we can learn from him in our modern times. Jalaluddin Rumi, as everyone knows, has been widely read, and there is a growing interest in him recently, especially in the West. So personally as a practitioner in leadership development and executive coaching, and an admirer of Rumi, I've always been intrigued by his deep insights and into human nature and the human soul. The man's raison d'etre, as we would say, and in this life, and the dynamics between the soul and behavior. So in my practice as a leadership development expert and executive coach, I often find myself quote a few lines of his poems in my lectures on leadership and even with my clients. So I thought today, when I was invited by CIGA to share with you a few thoughts, which are by no means exhaustive, because Rumi's wisdom is more encompassing than can anyone a single lecture or book do justice to. I don't think anybody will disagree that our modern times are living a leadership crisis, and the success of an organization or of a nation is a factor of its leadership. Nations rise and others will fall down, mainly because of the quality of their leaders. So I'm sure in our current situation everybody has locked down, and we're wondering, among other things, what kind of leadership do we need in a world where everyone says will no longer be the same. The word AC, I'm not here talking about after or before Christ, it's after Corona, as Thomas Friedman called it in a recent article in the New York Times. So this is a recurrent and timely question that we all need to ask. So it is in this context that I want to share with you some thoughts of what we can learn from a Sufi saint and poet, faqih and wise man of the 12th century, Jalaluddin Rumi. And Just to do, not to assume anything about our dear audience, we just want to brief a little bit about Rumi, and apologies for those who already know of him. Jalaluddin Rumi was born in 2007 in Balkh, which is today's Afghanistan, and died in 2073 in Konya, in today's Turkey. So Rumi has been famous for his lyrics, for his epic Masnawi, or spiritual couplets. He has traveled with his family to Mecca, Middle East, Anatolia, an area called Rum, hence his name or surname Rumi. And he returned to Konya with the family. So I had the opportunity to meet with a lot of scholars and saints through his journey, and he has developed his thought system and his philosophy of life, if you like. There is one event in his life, or one key person that has transformed his life, and that's Shamsuddin Tabrizi. And he has a profound influence on him, on his poetry. The departure of Shamsuddin Tabrizi from the life of Rumi has extravagantly changed his life, his experience. So his life and experience and longing turned him into a poet of depth and deep in human soul. Rumi used Persian, Arabic in his poetry, in addition to also some Turkish and less of Greek language. So by the end of 20th century, his popularity has become a phenomenon, a global phenomenon, with his poetry achieving wide circulation in Western Europe and even in the United States. So why Rumi now? Rumi has been widely read and his works analyzed in different ways by different authors. Some attempted to derive themes from his writings, while others pick poems here and there and deduce lessons and wisdoms. Some attracted by the depth of his insights and they found echoes about their own worldview and human nature. Currently, he is thought to be the bestseller ever in the United States. And Rumi wisdom speaks to every time, and to me, it speaks even more so to our time. In my research, I have used several resources, books, articles, and blogs on the internet. And I should also mention particularly the book by Dr. Nevzat Terhan, a Turkish psychologist and author, called Rumi Therapy. And I consider this is one of the first ever profound books that have been written in modern times about an in-depth analysis of Rumi philosophy. Of course, there is the famous Anne-Marie Schimmel, the famous German scholar who has written a lot of books on Rumi. So I have relied also on my background in leadership development and executive coaching, and tried to merge all that with to deduce some lessons for all of us. Take this one just as a flavor to see what kind of person we're dealing with here. Sometimes you hear a voice through the door calling you, as a fish out of water hears the waves. Come back, come back. This turning toward what you deeply love saves you. So I am sure all of us, when we read this poem, we can see it differently. One can see it from that background. In other words, when we read Rumi, we are projecting ourselves, our longings, our unfinished business with our loved ones in his words. And probably that's what we are doing in this lecture. We're projecting our leadership aspirations onto Rumi's thought system. So with this introduction, the question is, which is the theme of this lecture, is if Rumi were with us in the boardroom, what would he tell us? And the boardroom is taken as a symbol of corporate life, decision making, running everyday's business, managing people, managing complexities, managing locally and globally. That's what the metaphor of boardroom refers to here. And from my readings and readings of writings left and right from the West and from the East, even from some modern Muslim scholars, I have deduced that there are two major themes that we can benefit from Rumi's poetry for today's leaders, and that is self-awareness and spiritual wisdom. So before I delve into self-awareness and spiritual wisdom as far as Rumi is concerned, allow me to go with you in a journey of these two themes in the literature. And we do a quick review of what has been written. So in the few slides, we'll review with you the themes of self-awareness in some leadership development literature. And we also will notice that some researchers, practitioners, and executive coaches have identified self-awareness as the single most factor for leaders. And as said in the introduction, in the daily practice, so either for when we develop leadership programs or when we work with leaders, it is indeed the single most important factor which is often neglected. And there is a phenomenon in leadership called leadership derailment. It's like a train going on the track and then it derails. And that's a phenomenon written about extensively in leadership literature, and it's called leadership derailments, where leaders have been found to derail and suffer even career challenges, mainly due to lack of self-awareness. It is not their technical knowledge that makes them derail. It is not their seniority level. It is not their extensive experience. It is their lack of self-awareness. And I would also like to add to that spiritual wisdom that we will and from that background, that I could see the connection between Rumi's writings and wisdom to us and to all of us as leaders. And every one of us is a leader in their own context. You are a leader in the family. You are a leader in the neighborhood. You are a social worker. You are a leader. You are a president of a nation. You are a leader. So I would like to claim that Rumi makes sense and has something to say to every one of us. So we'll go through some research on self-awareness just to put the general context of what we are talking here about. There has been a long-standing and cross-cultural interest in self-awareness by philosophers, scientists, and clinicians even, and leadership theorists. And these are some of the authors mentioned here. And this interest even goes back as early as 600 before Christ, and China as early as 500 before Christ. All the philosophers have focused in their advice to humanity, in their wise, in their mentorship of their nations, on self-awareness. In other words, the more you know about yourself, the more you know about your environment, the more you know about your God. As a matter of fact, as some Muslim scholars will say later. We will see later what they say. And what does that mean, particularly in the context of leadership, is a lot of times leaders assume a lot about their followers, about their environment, about their organization. Why? Because actually what they see, what they think is an external reality, is just a reflection of their own filters. So they see what they like to see. And the reality, in many cases, is completely or partially different from what they think reality is. Why? Because everything is seen through their personal filters. So the power of self-awareness is to take us in a journey backward into ourselves in order to see and become aware of those filters and change them, amend them, make a reconstruction of ourselves, of our worldview, in order to see reality in a more objective way. So, in other words, this is a big claim to make, and this is not my own conclusion. A whole history of psychology and psychiatry, as a matter of fact, and even the recent trend of positive psychology attends to this fact. So, as I said earlier, and later with Freud, study of the unconscious, the aspects of in the field of psychology to become highly concerned with self-alienation and issues connected with the operating from a false self. In other words, what we think is, again, as I said, is the objective reality is only partial to our view. In other words, constantly, always, already, our view of reality is distorted. And that's just human nature. Look, even when you look at a mirror, in the reality, you don't see yourself as you are in the mirror. You just see the reverse. What you think is left is right, and what you think right is left. Think about it. And subhanallah, this is probably one of the wisdoms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in creating us this way, because we never should think, but we know it all. We are already always partial in our view of life and reality. So the coverage of the topic of self-awareness is scientifically relevant way, in a scientific way. It started during the early to mid-century with Cooley, Mead, Faris, and Blumer, and these are all the references for you to go back to. Now, we'll move a little bit in general about leadership, and there are four main generations of leadership identity theory. Trait theory, behavior theory, contingency theory, and transformation theory. This is just very simple, succinct, if you like, summary of this. So the trait theory focusing on leadership, that leadership has a set of traits which are believed both inherent and acquired. The behavior theory focuses on observable behavior by leaders. And when coaching is applied on leaders from the perspective of behavioral theory, we focus on changing behavior by helping leaders become more aware of their behavioral patterns. As I said, we are almost on autopilot. We take a lot of things for granted. We take also others for granted. And we think that we know it all. But most of the time, unfortunately, we just live on autopilot. And that becomes even more serious when we talk about leaders, because the actions and decisions of leaders does not impact only themselves, they impact others. There's also contingency theory and transformation theory. And all the seminal treatments of leadership identity has been based on the work of psychologists and sociologists. So, again, as I said, lesson learned is that self-awareness is a critical part of being a successful leader. Lessons learned. Awareness of one's weaknesses enables leaders to work with others who have different strengths to them. So accepting others. Self-awareness helps leaders understand the impact of their actions on others. I may think that I am the greatest leaders in the world. I'm the greatest manager. I'm the greatest director. But it's only when others start giving me feedback that I start realizing how much I'm turning their life miserable, or I'm turning their life happy life. I may think that my decision at a point in time, or my feedback to a certain, or my action is all well and good. But most of the time, we are unaware of how it impacts others in tremendous ways. It is not something that gained by a one-off personality assessment. I do run a lot of assessment, believe me, and trust me, it's never enough. It is just the beginning. It is just that moment when that dark side opens with, that that backside in our mind that opens with a light of feedback. And we start from that moment moving on with the change of process. So it's a reflection that takes place over the years. And subhanAllah, in the Quran, and I'm sure in other divine scriptures and other philosophies of the world, there's always this call to reflect on self and reflect on the environment. It's a good practice for leaders and everyone to have reflective journals, because the journal, the reflection, is the dialogue of the mind with itself, which is something that's not allowed to us in our daily hustle and bustle of life. So it's a continual check-in back in with the self to see where you are at and how you are perceived by others and what your current strengths and weaknesses are. So as I was saying, how their actions and thinking influence the others. And this idea of how you are perceived by others is something that we find very often intriguing in leaders. But they don't often given enough times for themselves to reflect on how the others are perceiving them. It's all good. It's all enough. I am good. I made it. I'm here as a leader because I'm good. And people have to believe that I am good and have to accept it. And then when we go into this, if you like, denial state, then we will never, as leaders, as responsible people in society, become aware of the impact of our actions. There is a recent research, I'm sure you know about this, Stephen Covey, but what I liked about his the latest book is The Eighth Habit, when he started talking about conscience as part and purposefulness as part of leadership. And it's at the center of leading a powerful life. So this is this recent trend of talking about leading for a bigger cause, for a bigger purpose, with conscience. It's not about how much you know. A lot of leaders we have seen in organizations make it because of their seniority, because of their knowledge, because of their technical know-how. And there is a lot of research that talks about the interplay between IQ, intellectual intelligence, and EQ, emotional intelligence. And most of the research finds that emotional intelligence is actually the key factor of success, and actually it's even more important than the IQ. And we have seen examples in the recent history, in the past history, of financial crisis in the world, and organizations collapsing simply because leaders are driven by, not by conscience, but by greed, by power, by monopolies, which serve their immediate and the immediate needs of their network and their lobbies, but it has dramatic consequences on the world. And therefore, leading by conscience is becoming an important factor. And recently, after the financial crisis of the last century, of 2008, we have noticed that a lot of MBA programs have started including ethics as a key element, a key course in the MBAs, because there was a question of, if these are the MBA programs in the who is who business schools in the world, and this is the kind of leaders that have come and they have driven the world that crazy, then what are we doing with our leaders? What are we doing with our leadership programs? So in essence, for me, is self-awareness. Leaders are vigilant in their decisions and have an eye on ethical issues. There is also this recently research that talks about mindfulness and followership and ethics. Leadership authenticity goes beyond merely executing with presence, or a lot of leaders fall in the trap of leadership derailment due to ethical misjudgment. They think that if they make a certain deal or a decision, it has no ethical implications. Just simply because it's legally all right then it is also ethically right. Not everything legal is ethical, as I'm sure most of you would agree. So the true leadership journey starts from within. And leaders who are often prisoners of their identity processes needed ways to selectively resist and reflect on this problem. As a matter of fact, I like what these authors collectively say. There is a need for identity reconstruction through self-awareness, and it does take a process of reconstruction. One more aspect also related to this importance of self-awareness has to do with the cultivation of deep learning. And as we know in the research in systems thinking, we have three types of learning. We have single loop learning, and double loop learning, and triple or deep learning. And in a time of complexity as we are now, we do need a deep learning that would not only learn things for what they are and answer a question and take a full mark, or even double loop learning just to question the learning itself, but the deep learning to question the very thought that brought about this thinking, questioning even our assumptions that are often, as I said, autopilot. So we learn from mistakes through reflection within ourselves, and the reflection on the responses also we get through feedback. And as I said, we are living in a world of complexity. Complex problems require different breed of leaders. Leaders need to use adaptive thinking that move beyond the technical solution. A lot of our problems are not technical, do not require technical solutions. They require adaptive thinking. What is adaptive thinking? It's looking at the problem in a holistic way. It's both a cognitive process and also an emotive process. It takes self-awareness and executive poise to assess the situation, to dissect the situation. Scientific research would typically, or methodology, would analyze the situation by dissecting it into parts and then putting together the parts in order to make sense of it. Systems thinking or adaptive thinking would first look at the holistic view of things, and then it synthesizes before it analyzes. So analytical thinking dissects to understand. Holistic thinking or adaptive thinking synthesizes to understand. It looks at the whole, then the parts, and then the whole again, in order to see the implications of each of the parts on the bigger picture. So it is thought through this research of psychology that self-awareness has a major influence or impact on adaptive thinking, because leaders take their time and they are aware of their filters. They listen more, they listen better. They are not driven by their ego or by power or by an I know it all attitude. So also recently there is a research on emotional intelligence by Daniel Goleman and others, and he introduced the concept of emotional intelligence, and I will just share it with you very quickly here, not to divert from this introduction to our famous Rumi. In a nutshell, emotional intelligence has four components: self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. And self-awareness is the start of this journey toward emotional intelligence, because it gives us an accurate assessment of self, and which is often neglected, as I said, in our daily lives. Later, there was research by Gardner on multiple intelligences, not only intellectual, not only emotional, but there is music intelligence, social intelligence, and other types of intelligences. Now, all this has led to an interest in what is called spiritual intelligence, leading with conscience. I personally would prefer to call it spiritual wisdom. Because intelligence has always that aspect of something to be calculated, something to be assessed. Spiritual wisdom, to me personally, which I would believe Rumi would have used in his, or some translators of Rumi do not use this term, but I would think that Rumi would have meant this spiritual wisdom without using the actual words. So in the West, there has been recently an interest in spiritual intelligence, but of course in the West, the spiritual intelligence does not necessarily mean religiosity. It just means an attachment to a higher ideal, a purpose bigger than the immediate context, and a goal that is bigger than the sum of its parts. So with the current preoccupation of spirituality, especially in the West, spiritual wisdom or intelligence has gained interest, and a lot of people are also interested in Rumi from that very perspective. So it is understood to contribute significantly to success in the, especially for the Muslim scholars, it is believed to refers to a consciousness that views man or woman, human being, from the perspective of his being Khalifatullah fil ard, a vicegerent on earth. And this whole concept of Khilafah has been extensively written about. And in the context of leadership, it is very pertinent for a leader to perceive themselves as first and foremost a Khalifa of Allah on earth, because that implies a bigger responsibility, a view bigger than self, than the immediate needs of what I personally. So instead of probably sweating on or fighting on a small issue which would otherwise be solved with a Q&A, I would look at the whole thing in a more holistic way. Recently, there is a research by some scholars in Malaysia, and they have delved into this by looking at Ihya Ulumuddin by Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayh, in his book Ihya Ulumuddin. And they have done a great job in if you like, in integrating spiritual wisdom, West and East. And they have come up with a number of themes which I will share with you now. One is that meaning and purpose of life. Life without purpose is a journey without direction. Consciousness. Persons with high spiritual intelligence are conscious of themselves and live purposefully with a clear mind and refined awareness. So we're really talking here about a different breed of people, a different mindset, a different worldview. And very few people have the privilege of having this mindset and worldview in order to lead properly. That's why in the Prophet, when Sallallahu says, "Kullukum ra'in, kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyatihi," it's not just like that. It's not just to be a ra'i. It's a whole mindset. It's a whole worldview, and it starts and ends with a journey with self first and with self-awareness. For Al-Ghazali in Ihya Ulumuddin, the knowledge of the soul is the root to all knowledge, and actually to the knowledge of God. So notice that we are developing here a pattern throughout all this research of an internal or internalized journey. So really, before starting off in a journey in the outside world, what we really need to do is to start with self, which is often ignored, which is often taken for granted. And so we take ourselves for granted and we take the world for granted. And I'd like to share with you this, it's a very interesting model that this author has developed. And in a nutshell, the lower, the self-consciousness, they talk about the types of nafs al-lawama, النفس الأمارة بالسوء، النفس الأمارة بالسوء، النفس اللوامة، النفس المطمئنة. So النفس الأمارة بالسوء is the evil soul, if you like. I'm sorry if the font is not clear there. النفس اللوامة is the reprimanding soul, the feel bad about and what we have done. And النفس المطمئنة is the peaceful soul. So in a nutshell, for Muhammad Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayh, the more we get to a spiritual النفس المطمئنة, the higher the consciousness. So in other words, there is an equation here between self or self journey, نفس المطمئنة, and consciousness. So there is an interplay between the emotive and the cognitive. They are never separated. Most of the research in leadership probably focused on the cognitive, and or let me put it this way: most of the assessment of leaders and the decision to appoint someone as a leader has been made mainly based on their cognitive capabilities, on how much they have achieved, on the results, on the numbers. But experience has shown us that a lot of leaders derail because of their lack of emotional intelligence and that emotive side, and the lack of spiritual wisdom, if you will. Now, one very interesting findings of these researchers in this context is transcendence. And what they mean by that is, in order to gain that divine knowledge, the leader must be free from things other than God. And this is not a call for staying in the mosque 24 hours and being a saint and not doing, no. This is actually in the heart of doing business every day. But knowledge of God is not just about knowledge per se, but it's about consciousness of God in every action we do. In the Alchemy of Happiness, Al-Ghazali stated that man's attributes are the reflection of God's attributes. That's not Allah al-Husna. And in the Quran we read, and when I have proportioned him and breathed into him of my created soul, Surah Al-Hijr, verse 29. And what that means is there is already, always, a readiness of man to acquire the qualities of the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But because the way we have been educated, because the way we have been programmed, I should say, did not leave us a chance to, even our religious education did not focus on these qualities. We've often focused on ibadat, and that's fine, and maybe even the surface of ibadat, or the face of ibadat, but we often neglect the spirit of this ibadat. And one last point about this is, to reach a high level of spiritual intelligence through the aspects of transcendence, individuals should strive to develop 99 God attributes within themselves. So look at this, in every salat, in every prayer, and I'm conscious maybe some of the audience are maybe not followers of Islam, but you might follow this in your own religion or your own thought system, some types of prayers. But for Muslims, we often start every rak'ah with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And these two names, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, are two attributes of God. And just imagine that we embody this Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim in everything we do. And imagine leaders with Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim attributes in them. So what kind of life? And this is not some kind of a utopian life or a utopian world or a science fiction. Our history of Islam has many great examples of this, and the best example, of course, is our Prophet. Now, I'm finishing almost the introduction in order to go into the, if you like, Rumi. I've just skipped 2 points here about other aspects is spiritual resources. They can take the form of material books, Quran, Sunnah, that we can learn from. And self-determination, which is a vicegerent of God, as Khalifatullah fil ard. Man has the will to gain this status of God. So we should not play victim, as it were, and we say just, oh, we are a victim of the environment, and I couldn't make it because of this and that. Ibn Sina says there are no incurable diseases, only the lack of will. There are no worthless herbs, only the lack of knowledge. So in other words, Where there is a will, there is a way, as we would say in modern times. So some also another aspect is the reflection of soul or purification. The manifestation of soul purification is through the remembrance of God, dhikr, and the reflection, fikr. Also, Ibn Taymiyyah said, remembrance of God is to the heart what water is to the fish. And in the Prophet, in the sayings of the Prophet Hadith, the difference between the one who remembers his Lord and the one who does not is like the difference between the living and the dead. In the Quran also we read, successful is he who purifies himself. وَقَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهُ. And the last point of these authors is about spiritual coping with obstacles. And this is a very profound concept here. It's not about, a lot of times we see in leadership programs, in management training, how to cope with stress, how to cope with pressures of life, how to manage one's time. And here, from this this tradition of research talks about spiritual coping with obstacles. And it does not involve only the rational thinking, as it were, but also the emotional awareness, and also some spiritual consciousness that there is a God who is there to guide you, to show you the way. So with this, what can we learn from Rumi? And let's see some pearls, as I would put it, and some leadership insights. And the reason why I put that background is because Rumi, exactly without being aware of it, has influenced this tradition. So if Rumi was with us in the boardroom, what advice would he give us? And look at this, just to start, when we look at several examples of his poems and parables, Rumi says you are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. So his whole mission in life is to save the human soul from degradation and decay. He is a saint of happiness, liberator of the mind, and the peacemaker, peace for the world and peace for the oneself and peace for the world. And his writings present us with a suite of skills. I should say, to use contemporary language of leadership and coaching, a suite of skills, both cognitive and emotive. And I would even dare to say that he presents us with a personality profile. But it will require a lot of research into detecting this personality profile that Rumi wanted for man and woman in this life. A worldview to lead self while leading others. So, as we said, Rumi speaks in parables, in poetic quartets. He does not write, he's not a philosopher. He does not write long treatises as other philosophers. He's a dervish. He walks in the streets. He notices. He reads. He contemplates. And he speaks. His students were writing what he was writing. So he does not give, and he does not give direct advice, nor does he use the word leadership in his, or even self-awareness. So, but he calls for reflection in ourselves, our daily experiences, and the natural laws and the universe, وفي أنفسكم وفي الآفاق وفي أنفسكم, and reflect on yourselves, is the Quran, and in the universe. So in a nutshell, Rumi calls for a refined mind that is self-aware, a refined soul that is spiritually smart, to use our modern day language. So in the following slides, I'll share with you some poems, signposts, some insights, but where we can deduce some leadership insights from Rumi. And as I said, these readings are attempts to learn from his wisdom, and by no means he ever mentioned the word leadership or self-awareness in his writing. So let's so I could personally deduce, and from all the readings that I have done, is Rumi calls for leading with self-awareness. As we said, as a leadership challenge, leaders need to recognize and gain insights into their emotions. They need to realize and shape their interests, abilities, and values. And they also need to learn their strengths and weaknesses and gain awareness in regards to their personal characteristics. So what Rumi has to say to us? Don't insist on 100 to 90, for 90 will do. When it comes to man, imperfection will do. Don't dare be arrogant, for what specialty have you? Don't say, I am here for one, for we will get by without you. He who seeks a flawless friend will lose the one at hand. The Prophet explained this when he said, whoever knows himself also knows God. Another aspect of, he also gives us a very interesting story. He said once upon a time a master had a cross-eyed pupil. And one day his master said to him, go back to our house. There is a bottle on the shelf. Grab it and bring it to me. The pupil went to the house at once, opened the door and went inside. When he looked at the shelf, his master mentioned at the shelf that he once mentioned, he saw two bottles. He returned to his master and said, Master, there are two bottles on the shelf you mentioned. Which one shall I bring? His master replied, there is only one bottle on that shelf. Go and bring it. The people persisted. You are needlessly reprimanding me. There were two bottles on that shelf. If you want me to bring one of them, tell me, and I'll bring it. Which one? He meant. He argued. The master, who realized that his pupil would not abandon his stubbornness, said, seeing that you are insistent that there are two bottles on the shelf, break one of them and bring me the other. The pupil went to the house again. When he took one of the bottles off the shelf and broke it against the ground, he saw that the second one disappeared from sight. So this is how Rumi sends the message, but don't insist that you are always right. Don't insist on your worldview of life. Leading with passion and intention. And by the way, these are all themes that are currently today in the leadership literature. Leading with passion and intention. One of the leadership challenges that face today's leaders is some leaders often engage in a change process or a program not fully convinced if it is really worth it. They do it because they have to do it. They do it because it's part of the program. They do it because others have done it. They often give up even while delivering on the results. And at times they even doubt the value of their endeavor. It happens to all of us. You get in the middle of the way, and then we start losing interest. So what can we learn from Rumi in this aspect of leading with passion and intention? He says, a strong intention can make 2 oceans wide be the size of a blanket, or 700 years, the time it takes to walk to someone you love. So when you read on the surface, as I said earlier, different people will project themselves on this point. So for a lover who is away from his beloved one, he would love this saying because he said, oh, okay, so if I have a good intention, I will manage to see my beloved one. Or if I am far away from the ones where I need to be, then I just have to have a strong intention. And then to me, it is very pertinent to today's leadership or leaders. It is that persistent, it is that high energy, it is that vision with self-awareness and spiritual wisdom, as we have seen it in the previous slides. True leaders would actually lead with a high intention and passion to get to the results, never to give up, never to give in. Half-heartedness does not reach into majesty. You set out to find God, but then you keep stopping for long periods of mean-spirited road houses. So, in order to become a leader with passion and intention, half-heartedness does not serve. You can see it in our daily life, in our daily projects. If I engage in something and then we give up in the middle of the way, What have I done? And you can imagine what that means for leaders. And he also says, what you seek is seeking you. In other words, when you seek something with intention and passion, it will pay back. It will give you back. So keep seeking, keep moving on the way. What you seek is seeking you. Leading, there's also some advice for leaders to lead with an entrepreneurial mindset, not in a bureaucratic manner. Not some of the leadership challenges of today is some leaders wait until they are 100% ready, or until they can be fully certain and sure that this is what they want. And this whole phenomenon of project management, which is a great management tool, that's for sure, it serves a certain purpose. It serves sort of mitigating the risks and getting desired results for the organization. So they make plans and identify possible risks and how to get there. Even we learn from systems thinking that you can never ever be sure of the outcomes of the plans. There's always change. Look at where we are now. And suddenly, the whole world has changed. So where are all the plans? Where are all the 5 years strategic plans and all? They need to be there. But if we follow them to the T and we just get stuck in that mindset, we are losing a lot of opportunities. So that's the difference between a corporate, or if you like, a typical mindset and entrepreneurial mindset. For Rumi, he encourages this entrepreneurial mindset. And he says it in his way: load the ship and set out. No one knows for certain whether the vessel will sink or reach the harbor. Cautious people say, I'll do nothing until I can be sure. Merchants know it better. If you do nothing, you lose. Don't be one of those who won't risk the ocean. And we can see it today in a new breed of leadership, a new generation of, in our modern times language, the startups and entrepreneurs, the young entrepreneurs who don't have a big budget, who don't have a big plan, but they just go. And not what is meant here, not just go out of haphazardly, but they have that courage of entrepreneurial mindset to try and test and learn as we go. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so open? So as I said earlier, a lot of leaders would see different angles of this, and that's the power of Rumi. If he was to say, to give direct advice or direct, wisdom advice, you just get the advice in that particular context. And we have also a good lesson in this in our Prophet ﷺ. In a lot of hadith, they just go by the general meaning, and then you apply it to your particular context. As you start to walk on the way appears. And that's a typical entrepreneurial mindset. Go out there and explore. Don't limit yourself to the prison house of your mindset or the prison house of your worldview. Go out and explore. Leading with love, servant leadership. And I'm sure in today's literature, very rare that you can hear about love in leadership or leading with love. But that's exactly what we need. It's some terminology called servant leadership. And even in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he talks about he says Khadim al-Qawmi Sayyidum. The master of the people is their servant, or the servant is their master actually. So one of the leadership challenges is not, love is not a word used often in business leadership, and yet it is the secret of self-awareness. And why is it the secret of self-awareness? It's because it's only when you love yourself and you love others, then you give a pause and start reflecting of what's going on inside you in order to gain that insight about the outside world. In our world of business and leadership, still dominated by outmoded models of control, hierarchy, and scarcity, competitors, we leave little room for leading from love. It's a jungle. It's It's a competition. It's the market dynamics. And God has created enough abundance in this life, but it's in this world, that it's enough for everyone, even more. Even with the Swahili University, they are leading an excellent project on zakat. And statistics show that if zakat is paid, only zakat, 2.5% of our money is paid, there will be no poor in the entire universe, in the entire world, or at least in the Muslim, in the countries where the zakat is paid. And that's statistics by research centers. And we have seen times in history of Islam where there were no poor, because the whole idea of abundance was predominant rather than scarcity and competition. Yet leadership is all about abundance, empathy, understanding, empowerment, engagement, and enablement. So Rumi also gives us advice in this context. Love is the magic potion that once drunk leads you into the alchemy of complete transformation. And you can apply that in your daily life. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against. You're not against it. In other words, it's already there. It's already there. But we have built barriers, cultural barriers, education barriers, all kinds of barriers, mental barriers, psychological barriers against this fountain that is deep inside us. So, another aspect of leadership is also leading with confidence and realize your full potential. One of the leadership challenges that we face today is lack of self-awareness. Lack of self-awareness often leads to a feeling of insignificance, of self-doubt, and even a skewed view of reality. Because I don't know, I'm not self-aware, I've never been given the chance to receive feedback. Even in the Islamic tradition, there is a saying by Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, رحم الله عبدا أهدى إلي عيوبي. May Allah bless someone who gifted me my shortcomings. And he called it a gift. And when you give someone a gift, for sure you will wrap it in the best manners that you can ever can. And lack of spiritual intelligence often leads to missing the big picture, the sense of serving a greater cause. What Rumi has to say to us here is the following: stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. There's so much power in you. Go out and realize your full potential. Lead with confidence. You can do it. You can make it. You were born with wings. Why prefer to crawl through life? Another saying, which I really personally, I keep reflecting on, is there is a candle in your heart, ready to be kindled. There is a void in your soul, ready to be filled. You feel it, don't you? And this is an excellent technique that Rumi uses when he talks as if he's talking to you in a very personalized manner. Why should I be unhappy? Every parcel of my being is in full bloom. And that's the whole trend today of positive psychology. Positive psychology deals with, it's for all of us, for like sane people. Psychiatry and so on deals mostly with the people who have psychological issues. So trend of positive psychology is all about realizing the full potential which is inherent in us. Lead with wisdom and insight. One of our leadership challenges today is that self-aware leaders realize that while introducing change, they need to be aware of the impact of their thinking and actions on others. You see, the dilemma of leaders, and we often say in leadership programs that leadership or leaders, the position of a leader is a lonely place. It's a moment of loneliness. It's an experience of loneliness because you are there and you have to take the shots and to make the decision and pave the way. And the problem is, if the leader is not self-aware, he's also not aware of the impact of his thinking on the others. And while making that point, self-aware leaders use wisdom, not power, to win over their followers. Self-aware leaders also realize that some followers will pay lip service to them, so they know who is who around them, and that's thanks to self-awareness. So it takes a skill of listening, deep listening, in order to take the wisdom, and to be self-aware and to lead with wisdom and insight. Most likely, what I'm assuming is right can just be one of my wrong assumptions. One of the sayings of Rumi in this context: yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. So again, it's all about the interplay of cleverness and wisdom. Which one serves us better in today's life? Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. So for leaders leading with wisdom, they need to make their point with poise, with convincing arguments, not with high voice and not with power, as is typical in many leaders of organizations and nations. Words are a pretext. It is the inner bond that draws one person to another, not words. For leaders, they also need to be watchful of lip service by those followers. And this is a common phenomenon in organizations who leaders circle themselves with advisors, so-called advisors. And most of the time, those advisors, either they're self-serving, I'm not going to generalize here, or they pay lip service to the leader's agenda. Very few advisors are there to actually give the true direction and the true advice out of conscience, out of spiritual wisdom, and out of sense of responsibility. So leading with wisdom and insight helps leaders become even aware of their surroundings, because most likely they make their decisions based on those around them, those close circle, if you will. Leading by learning from hardships and defining moments. Just a few slides and I'm closing. One of the leadership challenges that leadership talks about defining moments where leaders change course due to emerging challenges. All of us go through defining moments, and that's what we call when we do a self-assessment or a psychometric assessment, called the aha moment. In other words, the moment when one would say, okay, I didn't realize this. This is the first time I'm become aware of. Oh, thank you very much for that feedback. I never realized that I'm like this. And of course, different reactions, people react differently. There's some people who go into long-time denial or long-term anger, and some of them, with a lot of spiritual wisdom and awareness, they accept the feedback and they move on fast in their life. The defining moments are important for us because they are the source of our learning. Challenges could be business related or people related. It could be decisions. It could be how people are treating you around you as a leader, how they're looking up at you. Defined moments are usually marked by new insights, new learning from tough situations. So true leaders or spiritual leaders need to be aware of this, and they learn from hardships and defined moments. Some of the insights from Rumi: don't grieve. Anything you lose comes around in another form. Be empty of worrying. Think of who created thought. The wound is the place where the light enters you. And these pains you feel are messengers. Listen to them. And what hurts you blesses you. Darkness is your candle. Leading with humility is probably something that we need in our current times. Lack of self-awareness and spiritual awareness leads leaders to believe that to be known, praised, and adored is very important. Other people must realize what a special person they are. They just truly believe that. And standing out can sometimes cause a person trouble, as a matter of fact. So high spiritual intelligence helps leaders consider the societal benefits and whether or not the time and place is right. Insights from Rumi: know that the voice that gives you greed is the voice of the wolf that tears man to pieces. And he tells us the story of the peacock feathers. Can I ask just how we are doing with time?
We're doing good. If you want to take another 5 minutes, then we can begin questions, but take your time, Doctor.
Thank you very much. So let me share with you this beautiful story of the peacock's feathers. And as I said, Rumi talks in parables, in stories, and he wants us to deceive. There was a man who, upon seeing a peacock, plucked out his magnificent, colorful feathers. The peacock was tearing off his feathers, plucking out. And he said to the peacock, "Isn't it a shame to do that to such a beautiful bird? You keep plucking those magnificent feathers and casting them aside. Anyone would kill to have those feathers." "You are right," said the peacock. "So seeing that I am right," the man said, "there must be an explanation for this." "But I'm also right," said the peacock. "How is that?" asked the man. "Feathers are of no value to me," said the peacock, and added, "because people will kill me for them. So I must get rid of the feathers." "You are right indeed," said the man. In other words, this one has to be watchful of showing off and just saying that I know it all and so on, because that could cause a lot of troubles to. So leading with humility, leading with a sense of there is yet more that I can do, rather than showing off. How to deal with worry as a leader? Lack of self-awareness causes leaders to ruminate over a future event. These thoughts arise from the deeply rooted fear. With self-awareness, they catch themselves getting sucked in time to take conscious action. It's a lack of awareness and lack of emotional intelligence leaves us in a moment of ruminating over a future event. It may happen, it may not happen, or even about past events. Rumi tells us, "O soul, you worry too much. You have seen your own strength. You have seen your own beauty. You have seen your golden wings. Of anything less, why do you worry? You are in truth the soul of the soul of the soul." In other words, you are guarded or guided by the eyes of God. You have a source of guidance and wisdom. Just tap on it, and it will be there. Pray for me, and I will answer your prayers, says the Quran. Leaders do not ignore problems. Procrastination often leads to paying a higher price, and this applies to business decisions as well as to people relations decisions. And delayed decisions have lasting unintended consequences that we may not be aware of in the moment. So how leaders solve problems is as important as what they actually solve. So Rumi tells us a story. There was a man who planted thorn bushes by the side of the road. He was a well-spoken but callous man. He speaks evil to man. Those who saw him plant the thorn bushes condemned him. The thorn bushes grew and multiplied, and the thorns would puncture the feet of the passers-by. They tore the feet of the poor and rent the clothes of the rich. The governor ordered the man to put up the thorn bushes. The man said he would, but always procrastinated. I'll do it tomorrow, he would say. The thorn bushes grew robust as the years passed, but the man became too weak to root them out. And there is a big symbolism here about leaving unfinished business unfinished for a long time, either in business, in relations, or in decision making in general. So the bushes are a symbol of growing something and which hurts, but not to root it out and just leave it there. And it's a common phenomenon in therapy and also in coaching that a lot of decision leaders delay confronting a problem in their work life, and they only realize only when it's too late that the problem has grown out of proportion and they cannot lead it. And we are almost done. A couple of slides. Leading with empathy. Self-aware leaders determine and identify expectations of others, develop realistic expectations and for themselves and for the others. They comprehend other people's points of view, gain sensitivity to the emotions of others, and develop the skills to better understand people. And that's what all its empathy is all about. And again, as we said, again and again, lack of self-awareness and spiritual wisdom all cause these leadership challenges. So what Rumi says to us, do to the world what you would like done to you, even if it's torture and pain, for God is lying in wait. He reciprocates in kind before judgment day. There is certainly a passage leading from one heart to another. And this is a profound insight in terms of human relations. For Rumi, there is always passage from heart to heart, regardless of cultures, regardless of religions, regardless of geographies. It's in us, divinely embedded in us. So we just need to open that door. A final word. Rumi's teachings can help us avoid self-destructive attitudes such as hopelessness, weaknesses, and self-centeredness. And when consistently applied to our lives, they make us remarkably strong individuals. And strength is precisely what we need in these times of crisis and fear and loss and uncertainty. And we conclude where we started, as Rumi says, you are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. And I'm sure now, after these slides, you can relate to this saying in a deeper way. And that's what I would hope. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Doctor. I was happy to see the book that you mentioned by Stephen Covey. His first book came out when I was a child in 1989, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I knew about the book because my father was always working on self-improvement. He probably bought more books than he had time to read. And at that time, I was 9 years old. He had the idea to take Stephen Covey's book and to change his parenting style or my activities to foster those 7 habits. I was 9, so I resisted. I didn't appreciate what he was trying to do. I found it interesting that Stephen Covey, his books have survived the test of time. I think it's been several hundred years now, and Rumi has proven himself that his advice and sayings certainly also survived the test of time. My question, it seems that right now, in the last decade or so, there's been a big push on self-awareness, that this is the main trait of good leaders. Do you think that we're going to be saying this 10 years from now, that self-awareness is the key, or will we look back on this era and think that, why were we looking at self-awareness?
I think so. I think I can only judge from what I notice in the work, in the corporate life, and in the work what's going on now. Yes, for sure, self-awareness has proven but it is a key factor for successful leadership. I don't want to talk politics here, but a lot of examples that we have seen in recent history. Greedy leaders, greedy politicians, greedy corporate leaders. All the financial crises that we have seen, banks and stock markets, and at the root of it is either a lack of spiritual wisdom. In other words, taking decisions unaware, or actually not unaware, but consciously ignoring the ethical implications of that. And also, a lot of times, it's just greed and trying to achieve results for purpose, for a certain limited goal, but without looking at the holistic view of decisions and their impact on the nation, on the country, on the organization. So, in short, I think I can only say yes, based judging on the consequences that we see in front of us, because as we move on, corporate life is going from disaster to disaster, from crisis to crisis. The world is becoming just a crazy place to live. Corona has just come to say, I'm the equalizer. In other words, I'm going to equalize all this, and a lot of failures have just come to the surface. And all of that, the world that we were living, is a sum of the leadership decisions, the decisions that our leaders have made, left and right, east and west. And again, as you mentioned earlier, most of my practice is in the corporate world, but we can extrapolate it and apply it also to life at large.
Definitely, yeah. Coronavirus is the thorn bush of the year, and hopefully not for the decade. We'll see. Certainly, depending on the country you live in, you may or may not be happy with your leader. Our director, Dr. Sami, asked a good question. Are there meaningful differences between political leadership and other forms, such as religious, corporate, or business? What would be the main traits or characteristics of good political leaders? Is it self-awareness, or what other main traits make a good political leader?
To me, thank you, Dr. Sam, for the question. To me, a leader is a leader. Just the context is different. And I think the dynamics, obviously the context is different, the dynamics will change, and therefore the challenges will be changing. Maybe at the level of the political leader, the magnitude is larger, the interests are bigger, the challenges are global. So to speak, and therefore, that's in terms of the context. But I personally truly believe that from several years of practice and reflection, that a leader is a leader whether you put them in an organization or as a minister, or as a matter of fact, we have seen a lot of cases where a corporate leader is promoted and become a minister. So he was a CEO of a bank, commercial bank in one country in mind, and then he became a minister of finance in that country. So that's a political leader, and he was just a CEO in a corporate. And trust me, the dynamics remain the same. The people around them remain the same. The decision making remain the same. The context become more problematic, more challenging. So therefore, the world of executive coaching, I know more senior executive coaches than myself, and they are my supervisors, and I know that they deal with corporate leaders as well as political leaders. And in our reflection discussions, they say that the challenges are exactly the same, except that in the political sphere, arena, perhaps there are more hidden agendas, a bigger context, a more complex dynamics that would drive the leader to become part of a bigger agenda. Whether they like it or not, some of them believe it. Some of them they find themselves in the flow, and they go with the flow. But it remains a personal responsibility at the end of the day. So, Dr. Sami, I hope I'm doing justice here. Very good question, very profound question. I can only relate to that it's basically the kernel is the same, the challenges are the same, the attitude should be the same. I mean, when we say political leader, it doesn't have a president or it could be just maybe a governor of a city. That's a political leader at their level. And we have seen many governors of cities. We have even dealt with many ministers. And I can tell you from a personal experience that it shows who has more maturity and who does not, who lead with wisdom and empathy and who does not, who takes time to see the big picture from all angles and who does not. So at the end of the day, I would also claim that Rumi would speak to those leaders, even in the political context.
Good to know. Rumi, maybe write your book, Rumi in the Boardroom, and then second edition, Rumi for the Oval Office, and provide some political advice. A popular thing right now in business as well is escape room, locking yourself in a room with the board and looking for clues to escape and getting out. What do you think about tactics such as this?
I mean, they're not new anyway. They have always been there. And when you said Oval Office, and your question, it reminded me of a Hollywood movie called 13 Days, and I'm sure most of us have watched it. And that tells the story of President J.F. Kennedy. In the famous crisis with Russia on missiles and in Cuba, when and those moments of 13 days of it's a very powerful movie, and you often use it. Some experts of it in the leadership programs. And when they are actually in exactly the room that you mentioned, and with all kinds of advisors, and he's seeking advice. And he was quite a poised person. He would ask questions, at least as it showed in the movie, and he would listen to all the opinions. And obviously, you imagine that the military really wanted to strike back. And most of the analysis was to strike, actually, not to strike back. Most of the military analysis was that it's a military tactic by Russia, by the Soviet Union then, and at that time, and then it's a potential threat to the U.S. security. So strike. And he would look at his brother Robert and his advisor, and they would pause. And then just in a fraction of a second, he just says, "Thank you very much, gentlemen," and he left the room. And I would reflect on that moment of not making a decision in such a drastic moment, not to go with the flow with the entourage and the advisors, and to take a pause and reflect on the consequences of the actions, and not to assume a lot. Otherwise, if they went by with the assumptions around, then there would have been a war. And as we always all know, that eventually the crisis was solved in that manner, and so on. So I don't think there is anything new about that. It's just probably the name, but it has always been a practice, not only in the political sphere but also in the corporate world. And it is exactly in that boardroom. It is exactly in those moments of decision making where we need to deduce the wisdom of. And at the end of the day, it's just it's about us as human beings. It's about how we handle a situation, how we perceive and how we rationalize and how we, reflect on the situation and contemplate the unintended consequences. I was teaching a course called Systems Thinking, Managing Complexity from a Systems Perspective. And I can assure you that a lot of concepts there were just turning the students' minds, they were blowing the students' minds. They say, but how can we think systemically? How can we think holistically? And that's exactly it. Complex system, complex times demand complex thinking. We cannot solve a complex system with a simplistic mind. And add to that an aspect of emotional wisdom and spiritual wisdom, and I think the picture becomes clearer. But it's not one man's job. It's a collective board that needs to make that call.
Definitely. Another good question. Thinking about big picture leaders, not just short-term mission-oriented, what are the main characteristics of big picture leaders? And if you have an example, it's helpful. Characteristics of big picture leaders.
Yeah, very good question. I mean, several characteristics that come to mind. One is what I was just explaining now is the ability to see the situation from all aspects. In other words, applying holistic thinking. In other words, asking the good questions about every aspect of the situation. There are several books in this on systems thinking, encouraging questioning our own assumptions, and not jumping to conclusions at first sight. That's one aspect that I find personally very lacking in the leadership sphere. Very few leaders you would say yes, they are deep listeners. They think big. And so one characteristic is to think systemically, holistically. Second, that's cognitive. Emotive is to be aware of to catch oneself in the moment, feeling a certain way, or go in a certain direction with one's feeling toward the decision or direction of the organization, or if that catching in the moment. Usually we say catch yourself, catch someone doing something wrong, but there is also catching someone doing something right. And big picture leaders have the ability to catch themselves in the moment, to watch themselves in the moment. Okay, so at this very moment, what am I doing? Why am I thinking this way? Why am I preferring this option to the other option? And that takes a lot of poise and a lot of emotional maturity and listening without letting emotions. A lot of times, if leaders have a conflict with someone in the room or in the boardroom or in one of their followers or another leader in another place, their decisions would probably typically be driven by emotions and by the urge to pay back and to make a point. Emotionally mature leaders and big picture leaders do not succumb to that level of thinking small, but rather, and that's what spiritual wisdom, and that's the third aspect of big picture thinking, is that moment of what do we have here? So we have this issue. Now, how to solve it? So I would not point to the person. We would tackle the problem, and applying that moment of empathy and allowing the others to speak their mind, and allowing differences. And so there are three things that come to my mind, and thinking holistically, systemically, becoming aware of the unintended consequences of actions, having that deep listening and emotional maturity, and also spiritual wisdom in the sense of letting go of issues, giving moment of listening more, and considering all aspects. Of course, when we are in the political sphere, we all know. I'm sure someone will say, well, that's all airy-fairy. We go to the real life and it's a different world. I have a party that I'm serving. I have a political party that I'm serving. I have an agenda that I'm serving. Well, yes, that's exactly the problem. You're right. You are actually serving a political party. You are serving a certain agenda. Well, that's what we have. And then, are you a true leader then in that aspect? Well, maybe you are serving a term of 3 years, 6 years. You are a president of this institution or vice president of that institution for a limited period. I have seen it. Serving a certain purpose for a certain period of time for personal interests. And so leadership is a lonely place, and I just say God help him in life and in the after.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Doctor, for your very interesting seminar today. This is worth further consideration. Definitely worth a series and a book. Get it done. I'm interested. I think a lot of people will be interested. It's certainly relevant. Rumi has survived the test of time. Thank you, Doctor, for sharing this today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
For those who have been attending our webinar series, again, tomorrow at the same time, our topic will be the impact of Hindu nationalism in occupied Kashmir in India by Dr. Hafsa Kanjwal. Tomorrow for our 20th lecture. Thank you from CIGA, Center for Islam and Global Affairs, Dr. Sami, Dr. Mimouni. Thank you for your time today. Everybody have a good day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.